Formerly suicidal redditors, what's something that kept you alive a little while longer and helped you to get through the dark times in your lives? Let me paint you a picture. My worst day still brings tears to my eyes, even though it is now almost 8 years in the past. I didn't really notice at first what was up. I just couldn't lay in bed anymore, couldn't sit, couldn't stand still, read, watch videos on YouTube or listen to music. I was utterly and completely restless. Yet at the same time somewhat serene and calm. Almost as if looking at myself through someone else's eyes, I realized what my wandering gaze was searching for. A place in my room to hang myself at. Now what turned me away from suicide? I'd love to give sentimental reasons, thoughts of loved ones and the pain I might now I know would have caused. The truth is my stubbornness, my unyielding will to survive did. It clawed its way through the numbness, through the utter despair and hopelessness I felt and dragged me, kicking and screaming, back towards the surface. The walk from my place, probably smelling foul, reeking of days without a shower, to my doctor's office was tough. I wished for the brakes of the bus on the road to fail. I hoped the driver would fall asleep and for the bus to hit me. I thought about drowning myself in the channel I had to walk along. But I made it. Now I see my stubbornness as one of my greatest sources of strength. It helped me prevail through one of the toughest exams my country has to offer. And this experience taught me compassion towards those who actually go through with suicide. Because I feel that however deep my despair and helplessness was, those who go through with it must feel it even more strongly. And if there is no word I feel is strong enough to describe what I felt, I don't even want to think about how deep their abyss must be, how far from the surface they must be, the pressure mounting on them having to hold their breath without the hope they could break through the surface and breath again. Edit, I tried to fix what autocorrect and writing in my second language messed up. Every other remaining mistake is probably intentional by now. Didn't want to be alive after my mother had taken her own life, about the 5th and hardest suicide I've dealt with, and my brother was circling the drain as well. But I recognized the pain I was feeling at another person's choice to leave. And knew that at even my lowest points I was willing to fight off that call to the void purely to ensure that nobody else had to feel how I felt, as a result of my actions. The fact that things will get better. I have never attempted, but I have been suicidal, especially in high school. It does get better, you find other people. Also, support. The thought that my kids would have to grow up with their dad, my dad, and other family members fighting over custody. Plus I grew up without a mom and didn't want the same for them. Going to counseling, not being in an abusive relationship and practicing self-care helps a lot. I read a story from a girl saying she was considering suicide when she was about 15, and she went on to say she was 24 and could hear her husband making silly voices when reading their kids a story. She said life gets better. Make sure you're there to see it. I wanted to be there to see myself pull through and get married with kids so I could look back and know she was right and that pain wasn't even a blip on my radar anymore. My online friends would at first hope that I'd get back on, then weeks, months, years would go by and they'd wonder what happened to him. Frankly, that's still the reason why I haven't done it now, because my internet friends would miss me. Heroin, 2 years clean, yay. Realized I could kill myself without physically dying. The urge was for a radical identity change, or the death of my prior identity, not actually to stop existing. Weed and moving out of my parents' house. I feel better. Talked with an alright therapist that helped me realize like a pine tree I am resilient. Also, proper medication for depression. My mother and sister visited me in the loony bin, and brought my young toddler niece to see me. I looked at her and realized in that moment that my life is not just my own, and that we are all connected. After that, I had no choice. Doesn't matter how shitty my life gets or how depressed I get, I just can't off myself. I have to stay alive for everybody else around me who would be affected by my death. This allowed me to then begin the first step forward. Each time I falter or struggle, I still get back up and take that first step forward again. I may not always like it or want to continue, but I do. Incidentally, by having this new ability to make an effort, my own life is much better, simply by wanting to make it better, or at least not make it worse, for others. Now, I imagine, this only works for people who actually care about other people. If you are one of those people, then you don't really have the choice you think you had. This is similar to things people who have had kids might say about their own lives. Oh, having kids was what saved me. I live for my children, but I don't have any children. I just needed that one moment that truly opened my eyes to who and what was around me, in a real way. I know how depression works, as I've experienced it for the majority of my time alive, and still do. I know some who read this may say to themselves, oh, great, well, nobody would really care if I was gone and I don't really affect anybody positively, so the world would be better off without me. I used to think that, too. Take on the possibility that you might have been wrong this whole time. Admit you were wrong about yourself, and be okay with having been wrong. Sit with it for a bit. As others have already posted, why the hell not? If it gets so bad, you could even buy a bus ticket to somewhere completely different and try something entirely crazy before you go out. Seriously, if you're thinking of doing it, just try one more thing before you do. PSSSST. There's always at least one more thing. I was in a bad place when I met my partner. I had left my cheating husband and not long after that ended up in an emotionally abusive relationship, out the frying pan and into the fire. I was at the point that there was no point in anything anymore. Last attempt for me to connect to anyone for anything was on Tinder, believe it or not. Met my partner and we have been together 3 years, got 2 cats and own our home. If I hadn't met him I probably wouldn't be here anymore. The thought of my daughter growing up without a dad. Specifically, the idea that somehow offing myself will have failed her more than I already have. So really, it just felt like more of a fuck-up move than how I had already fucked up. The thought that I wouldn't be able to experience new music. Music has been the one thing that consistently gets me through whatever life throws at me, and I can't imagine not getting to feel all of the music that hasn't yet been made. For me it was my pit bull. He was always there for me and he listened. Sometimes people just need to talk, no feedback, just talking and knowing someone is listening and not someone who writes it down and takes notes. I'm not to assignment that's due, so no need for notes. Sadly he passed away a couple of years ago, but I still feel like he's there for me, still listening. I'm not gonna out his name cause it's not in English and trust me you would butcher it. Also I'm doing much better. TL, Dr. My Pitbull. That bitch Holly from high school. I wasn't gonna give her that win. The thought of my dog not understanding why I would leave her. My friend and I talked about suicide and all this other stuff about it. I strictly remember him saying before I wanted to hang myself was, you can't be coward enough to try and escape this shitty reality while leaving everyone else like your family to deal with it without you. So that's what helped me push through the night. Talking to my best friend who was also suicidal. Later in life I voluntarily went to inpatient psych. Late to the party it seems, but I have 3 things keeping me here. First and second are 2 cousins I have whom are both highly depressed and suicidal. I'm their rock. If I'm gone I doubt they'll last, whether they just break or take themselves I don't know. Third is a quote from Peaky Blinders. By Winston Churchill, I put out a cigar and an hour later I want another. Sometimes the bridge between ours is as fragile as that. Use it anyway. It seems like nothing, but if there's a small thing to look forward to it is better than having nothing. A cup of coffee, the sound of a song, a cigar. Who cares? Whatever keeps you alive and going. The only thing keeping me alive was the thought that I was too indecisive about how I would kill myself. Yet me not being able to pick something let me live. Realizing that I didn't want to die but was always physically experiencing such excruciating pain and sorrow is when I knew there was something wrong. Went home, saw as many doctors as possible, and got on a treatment plan. Now I don't overthink it. I just plow through my days and take them on as open-minded as possible while also keeping myself physically present. It's made life more fun. This is going to get buried considering how late I am to the party, but I still wish to share in case someone reads this and it helps them. The only thing that kept me from ending it all a little over a year ago was a small little kitten named Benvolio I had adopted with a woman who eventually dumped me. The dumping was merely one droplet in a myriad of droplets that eventually felt like a deluge I was drowning in, and at my worst it felt like the best option was to metaphorically just breath in the water so I could literally just die and never feel like this ever again. And I was close, too. Pills and some whiskey on the dresser, ready to go, a note next to it signed and everything. But then I saw Benvolio. He was sitting next to an empty food bowl and was staring at me, apparently hungry and waiting for the person he loved and trusted most to feed and play with him. So I got up real quick, fed him, and then sat back down to stare at what I planned to kill myself with. And then I just couldn't. So I cried. I cried a lot thinking about what would happen to him when I was gone and how confused he would be when I didn't wake back up to feed him the next morning. So I didn't do it. I got blackout drunk instead. But I woke up the next morning, saw my cat's empty bowl, and was glad, for a brief second, for the first time in a long time. It's been about a year, and I'm still working to put my life into a place and order where I won't be as anxious all of the time. But I'm glad I'm not dead, and it feels now for the first time in a while like happiness is a feasible reality instead of an impossible fantasy. I won't pretend to know anyone else's pain, but I feel comfortable saying that it's not worth killing yourself. You may not feel like your life is impacting anyone or anything, but you are. Even if that life you're impacting or are important to is that of a tiny little cat.